a progressive actually can't have empathy or compassion or love for someone from the alt-right because he just has demonized that person as a racist, sexist, fascist. How can you love that? You can't. These terms are in effect, I mean, it's not the same thing as calling someone a literal devil, but in effect, that's what it is. When you call someone a racist or a fascist, that effectively puts them in the category in your mind of like a secular version of a devil. You're always going to hate that person. You're never going to get along with that person. And you're always going to misunderstand the person. That's the problem. Now, I hear progressives here making sort of counter argument. They say, well, but Leo, but why would I want to love the fascist and the racist? Why would I want to love him? Why would I want compassion for such a monster? I mean, am I supposed to like hug a Nazi, kiss a Nazi, make out with a Nazi? No, we got to defeat the Nazis, is what you might say. And at a certain relative practical level, yeah, you got to defeat Nazis if they're, coming to town to actually kill you. But first of all, you should notice that the majority of the alt-right are not actually Nazis. So don't overblow it. That's one of the problems with this sort of black and white, thinking and this demonization is that you take it too far. You lose the nuance. So first of all, there's that. Second of all, though, is that you will never actually understand them, and you will never have a truthful understanding of their perspective. And that's what should bother you. Now, I'm not saying that you got to go vote for a Nazi or a fascist, and I'm not saying that there's no problems with the alt-right. There certainly are many problems, and I personally would never vote for an alt-right candidate for office. And I would, in fact, speak out against it. But there's a deeper meta issue here, which is that regardless of how you vote and what kind of policies you want and what kind of action you take in the world, more important than that is your capacity to actually understand and make sense of other people's perspectives. That's more important. Because as soon as you drop your intellectual integrity and you get sloppy with it and you start misunderstanding other people's perspectives, this is the beginning of the end. Because you're detaching yourself from truth and from reality. The divergence now is going to grow between your ego mind and your worldview and truth and reality. And eventually, it's going to grow so wide that epistemic blunders and catastrophe will happen. And from this will result all sorts of evils, violence, and war. Hatred, and so forth. So what we're aiming for here, I'm not saying something naive here in the sense that like we got to go hug and kiss terrorists and Nazis and allow them to rise to high office and so forth. I'm not saying anything that naive. Something very challenging is required here. On the one hand, you have to be ruthlessly pragmatic, and you have to be, especially when you're talking about politics, for example, you have to see what kind of consequences various kinds of political leaders and ideologies will have in the world, and you have to adjudicate between which ones will be better for the greater whole of mankind and which ones will be worse. That's important to do, but you can't let that pragmatism be the only thing that drives your politics or your life. Even more important than that is actually being able to understand other people and perspectives and worldviews and groups and so on. Otherwise, you're actually not going to be able to find holistic solutions. And you're actually going to delude yourself. And a lot of progressives end up deluding themselves about the motives of conservatives and right-wingers. And if you're a progressive, you might say, well, Leo, who cares? That doesn't really matter. As long as we're voting for the right people, we're voting for the good guys, as long as we're enacting the right policy changes, it doesn't matter if I misunderstand the intentions and, perspectives of some stupid fascist. It doesn't matter. But it does matter. You're being myopic. You're not seeing how this will boomerang on you. untruthful perception of reality always ends up mattering. It's just a question of how long will it take to boomerang. It may not make a difference in the next election cycle, but eventually it will make a difference, especially when this is done in a group as part of a collective activity. Because you see, you're not doing it alone. It's you and hundreds of other thousands of people like you, millions of people like you, who are going to be buying into similar kinds of perspectives, which are all going to be distorted in various ways. And then that's going to build upon itself and develop a life of its own. And this delusion will develop a mind and life of its own. It will become a collective ego of its own. It'll turn into an ideology, and it will misunderstand reality, and it will act from that place. And from that place will be created evil and suffering. It's a problem because of, if you watch my episodes, very important ones about holism and holistic thinking, part 1 and part 2, go watch that. See, what I talked about in that episode, I gave you sort of a master formula for how reality works. And I told you we equated, remember I equated consciousness and truth and health and holism. And I equated more things, but we'll start with those. Also love, right? The highest love is intimately tied with truth, consciousness, integrity, holism, and health. You can't have these things separated because ultimately they're all one thing, because reality is a unity. Love and truth point you towards that unity. And I said that goodness is equivalent to all of that. Goodness is the ability to see unity. So if you're, as a progressive, unable to see the unity that you share with a fascist, with what you call a fascist, and you don't see that fascist truthfully, but in some distorted way, then you can't love that fascist. And if you can't love that fascist, you're going to hate or fear that fascist. And hate and fear is ultimately what's going to lead you to act selfishly and to have various kinds of attachments. And that's ultimately going to lead to a lack of holism in your perspective. And a lack of holism is the very definition of what you fight against, which is evil and oppression and injustice. So it will boomerang on you. The problem is that you're not conscious enough, you don't have enough vision to see how it will boomerang. And so you think you can get away with it, but you're not going to get away with it. There's going to be a cost. And so it would be nice if you wised up to that. I mean, I'm not just picking on progressives here. I mean, the same problem, even more so, applies to how the alt-right, for example, see progressives or how they see socialists. There's a lot of demonization of socialists that's going on now within the right wing in America and around the world. And of course, it's obvious why the right wing is doing that, because from their worldview, their intention is good in demonizing the socialists. Because in their worldview, they truly believe and they see the socialists as just a rehash of the Soviet-style, Mao-style Marxism of the previous century and all of the hundreds of millions of people that they believe it killed as an ideology. And so they're really threatened by that. And so they're literally willing to do anything to prevent that kind of thing from happening again. So can you see how from the position of the alt-right or just even moderate conservatives, this idea of everyone now talking about Marxism and socialism and communism and demonizing capitalism and speaking negative about capitalism, how this is freaking them out. These people have not read Marx. They don't have a deep understanding of Marxism. They don't have a deep understanding even of capitalism. There's a lot of stuff they don't understand. But see, that ignorance is what defines that worldview, and you have to take that into account. If you're a progressive, you have to take into account that the people that you're demonizing are mostly just ignorant. They haven't been educated the way you have. Maybe they didn't go to school, they didn't go to university, or they didn't get good grades, or they didn't study the things you studied. They don't have a deep understanding of Marxism and so forth. And so can you really blame them for being scared and for demonizing something that they don't understand? If you actually understood that as a progressive, this would actually improve your life. So even though what I'm talking about here, at first it might sound like, oh, Leo, you're being so overly philosophical. None of this stuff is very practical. How is this going to improve my life? But it will improve your life. Because right now you're caught in this battle